This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
Hey, welcome. This is the Christian Missions in Global History seminar, and this is the spring term. It might not feel like it, but it's my privilege to chair the session and to welcome you and to introduce our speaker today, Arun Kumar of the Center of Modern Indian Studies of the University of Gottingen. Arun has done his BA and MA at Delhi University in history. He then started an MPhil at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, but was poached from the transnational research group Poverty and Education in Modern India, which is a cooperative endeavor of the German Historical Institute, the University of Gottingen, particularly the Center of Modern Indian Studies, and several institutions in India. But Arun is based mainly in Gottingen, but currently for a few months at the GHIL, and he is engaged in a PhD project, and his talk today is it covers a part of what he is doing in this project. And without much further ado, Arun, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks Silke and Rosemary for giving this opportunity.
I'm sorry, the title. I forgot to mention the title. Do you want to mention it?
I'll mention it because I just changed it. So, So the title of the talk is Beyond Colonial Borders: Mission Industrial Schools in Global Perspective, and the period is 1880s and 1940s. It's largely a discourse on poverty and vagrancy around industrial schools. I'll begin with two central points of the global history and see how a focus on missionary industrial schools in colonial India complicates or simplifies our understanding of global history or Christian mission itself in abroad. First is the idea of deterritorialization, which the global history seeks to establish. The global history reshapes our understanding of space in a powerful way. It makes a claim for a history beyond nationalist or regional framework. The global perspective replaces the national framework. The global becomes the site of historical unfolding where events occur, process happen and influence each other. The redundant historical framework of nationalism era is no longer a useful tool to explain the history. In an age of globalization, when global capital dominates our imagination and seeks its legitimization, are we simply replacing the word national, local, regional with the global? We need to think about that. In its bid to explore globality, the global history suppresses the local, anonymizes lived experience, abstracts individuals, their feelings and their desires. It tends to homogenize historical variety, local differences, alternative perspectives, and contestations. It tends to reduce local as a place of happening where things happened. It does not take into account how local itself has been constituted, how it received its meanings, how people living in the local perceive about the global, most importantly. Can we talk of local histories and yet be open to critical interventions of global history perspective? This paper suggests a possibility of reconciliation between the two extremes and argues retaining of a focus on local histories complicates and contradicts our understanding of global flows. Second point which I am making is a related point about the global history, which emphasizes strongly about connections, setting connections and exploring those connections. The global history highlights episodes of global connections, networks, similarities in cultural, economic and political processes. However, there is little unwillingness to consider processes which registered these episodes of connection as part of global history. Like progressive histories, global histories also portray history as an unfolding of globalization. It has no space for dissenting traditions which attempted to occlude these global circulations of ideas and practices, there is little space for negotiations, with differences which arise from similarities. So I'll try to kind of bind these two arguments with my findings in India. Basically, the focus is mainly colonial India. And for your geographical clarification, I'll try to kind of locate the place where I'm talking. Yeah. So, in the summer of 1973, the German Protestant organization Broad für die Welt, which regards itself as a part of the global Christianity, sanctioned a grant of rupees 19,46,000 for a distantly located small town industrial school in Nazrat in Tamil Nadu of South India. And Nazrat is the red point. That's the most southern part of India. The grant was to be utilized for a building tool room and a workshop with requisite machines for industrial school boys, which they learned from which they learned practical skills in various crafts. In addition, Mr. Leonard Loers from West Germany gifted rupees 2,75,000 for renovation of the hostel building of the St. John's Home for Children, where the students of the industrial school resided. Whether aware or not, the school was part of an emerging global phenomena called global Christianity. The British retired from India in 1947, and so did various missionary societies. The visit of foreign delegation restored the international ties of the school and exalted its position both locally and globally. In the local memory, the event marked a watershed in the springing history of a school and town. Local people tried to recall the event in their own ways. Some remembered the visit of German people in the town and grant of a round figure of 20 lakhs, while others remembered only the grant of 2 lakhs. In the act of recall, the worth remembering thing was the visit of foreigners in the town and the figures of lakhs. In local narratives, history of the school was synonymous to the history of the Nazareth town, because it was the town with which the people relate their familial history. The Nazareth Industrial School was established in the midst of great famine of India. In 3 years' time, when the famine was between 1876 and 1878, about 5.5 million famine-stricken people had died. Many collapsed to die on the way, others waited for famine reliefs to be given. Families abandoned their children and cattle. Deserted children wandered in bazaars for search of food, slept on roads, and begged in public. Moved by their humanistic and philanthropic concerns, missionaries found the famine a new opportunity to appropriate large numbers of orphaned children in their fold. It was believed that they could be trained into respectable and hardworking human beings, and their becoming of Christians was a matter of time. We do not know what pushed more missionaries to establish orphanages or industrial schools in colonial India, whether the humanitarian concerns or the proselytization greed. Certainly, engagement with the famine relief work had a hidden desire. In the Tinuveli diocese of southern India, where the school was located, the English Missionary Society, SPG, Society for the Propagation of Gospels, established the St. John's Orphanage in Nazareth in 1878, which will later culminate into industrial school. The town itself was built as a Christian colony in 1840s, and the name Nazareth justified its habitation. Orphanages and industrial schools in the town became post-histories of famine. As Nazareth became home to feed the poor, orphans, destitutes, and vagrants, more and more children joined. Securing food for them and a livelihood was a continuous problem for missionaries. At the same time, these native bodies had to be trained into a Christian bodies. The SPG Madras Diocesan Committee report of the year 1879, just after when the school was established, mentioned in most villages and towns are to be found men and women who live partly by begging, partly by stealing. If such persons had been taught a trade in their early years, they would now be respectable members of society. It is our object to teach each child in orphanage some industrial work, so that in future it may be able to learn an honest and competent livelihood. Goals of philanthropy and greed for proselytization came in direct conflict with issues of manageability and finance. Opening an industrial school served both purposes. So this is the kind of older map of Nazareth, dating back 1880s, created by SPG missionaries themselves. So this is a kind of a picture of bad picture of orphanage in the early days, where actually they have very few children, and missionaries kind of standing, and then the orphan building itself. In industrial schools, boys will learn to do labor, produce goods for market, and imbibe values and ethics of hard work, honesty, discipline, and loyalty, which were needed. The SPG was the missionary agent of the Church of England. Christian denominations in England were heavily engaged in philanthropic work for poor and vagrants. They ran industrial schools and poorhouses. Missionaries in India carried with them ideas about poor, orphans, beggars, criminals, and also about the ways to manage or control these bodies. While the plans for establishing the Nazareth industrial schools were still concretizing, Reverend Canon Morgisis, the father of the Nazareth, as the local Christian people still call him now, visited England for many times to learn the means of organizing an industrial school. Discussions around the kind of education and future of orphanages became a central not only to SPG missionaries but to other missionary societies as well. The issue was not so crucial to all missionaries society in India. The issue was so crucial to all missionary societies in India that it was heavily discussed in the Missionary Conference of South India and Ceylon, where most of the missionaries who worked in India gathered in 1879, and they pointed that an elementary education should be given to orphans but not to be trained up to higher position in afterlife, and manual labor should form the essential part of the curriculum. Ideas about a hierarchized education system based on caste were not limited to European societies. They found their way in colonial society, further invoking their justification on the grounds of castes and race. Missionaries drew their intellectual thrust from 18th century Western ideas about poverty, problems of their childhood, pointing out the need for industrial education in mission work. At present time, M.E. Sadler, who was a missionary in South Africa, emphasized in the missionary journal The East and the West that how education, thought, and experience in Europe, America, and elsewhere were emphasizing the character, forming values of hard work and of vocational training. Similarly, I'll talk about kind of just to give you a kind of variety of the industrial schools that they came up, and the kind of varieties of missionary societies that were engaged in this kind of work. I'll give you an example of another industrial school presently known as Katpadi Industrial Institute, which grew out of a different context, but the concern was related: philanthropy and poverty. It started with a burdened question, which was what could be done to uplift India's downtrodden masses. Missionaries were faced with a huge number of converted untouchables and lower caste who looked their conversion as a source of social and material upliftment. The school was established in 1886. American missionaries saw industrial school. So this was American Arcot missionaries who maintained this Katpadi Industrial School, also in southern part of India. American missionaries saw industrial school as a kind of antidote to the problem of Indian poverty and backwardness. The genesis of industrial school was constituted in the poverty of natives who got converted to Christianity. Conversion to Christianity was taken very serious by the native caste people. Becoming Christian was considered to loss of the old status, which was also meaning the loss of the old caste, not only in terms of caste rituals but also in terms of occupation. Agro-industrial moral economy of 19th century colonial India was synchronized with caste rules and worked as per customary norms. Once caste was gone, privilege of doing caste occupation business were also lost. Artisanal and peasant castes, including untouchables who embraced the faith of Christianity, became non-caste in the sense of customary rights. So they could not get hold of their already occupation which they used to do before turning into Christian. A social and occupational boycott by Hindu communities helped in further pauperizing their position. This disturbed the harmony of proselytizing project of many missionaries, including American Arcot Mission. Reverend J.W. Conklin, American missionary, reported that it is not possible for our Christian boys to obtain trades by ordinary apprenticeship. That is by sending the Christian boys to Hindu artisans, because every trade is a caste and is bared against outsiders. And since they were converted, they were considered now outsiders. An industrial school seemed to be the only solution. Industrial school had a back logic as well, as church needed constant financial support to carry its proselytizing mission. It also needed money and human resources in the form of labor, and hence the need for industrial schools was very much. The industrial school was intended to elevate the poor from their status. Reverend C. Scudder, manager of the school, Katpadi Industrial School, in 1890, reported, "There are many who will be glad to carry on technical education among the poor in our mission. That branch is receiving worldwide attention." Technical education had its universal appeal to missionary societies. As the school was under the American missionaries, it employed American instructors, managers. The school had an American flavor in its curriculum, but the adherence to colonial curriculum of industrial schools put a check on it, because they needed grants from the state, from the government. These European initiated industrial schools, workhouses, reformatory schools were also prevalent in other colonies. In case of Belgian Africa during Leopoldine era, Barbara A. Yates highlights that missionary industrial education was of shifting nature, that is in Africa. While during 19th century concerns was to produce a high class of craftsmen to be employed for missionary services, while during early 20th century the attitude shifted toward educating a bit of carpentry along with a general education to create a class of catechists and pastors. The fear of black races joining the lines of literary oriented elite was so powerful that it forced Congo missionaries to control the education orientation by promoting industrial schools. The case of Belgians shows ideas of industrial education were in negotiation with colonial settings. Missionary societies maintained industrial schools in Africa, China, and other places also. The question of educating poor natives. Now, I mean, so far I have been talking about the colony, about the local, but now I kind of turn towards the metropole or towards the west, from where these ideas were actually circulating or migrating to colonial borders. The question of educating poor natives in industrial schools was not a phenomenon peculiar to colonial India. It has its own genealogies to be traced in industrializing nations and colonies. What is interesting here is to see how ideas of industrial schools were appropriated in India by missionaries and further transformed when met with customary norms and caste regulations. Local spaces in India were well connected not only to its metropole but also to other nations by the end of 19th century. Global connections and interconnections had their own role in making of urban spaces in India. Many cities like Jamalpur in Bihar came as a kind of purely European capital railway town. So the point is that global connections were quite central also to the emergence of local spaces. And local were not only place of happening, but we need to also see that how the local itself is making through global connections, and it's not merely a site of happening, a site of occurrence. There were many forms of industrial schools or industrial education in different countries. There were industrial schools, technical schools for higher grade technical training, mechanical institutes, trade schools. SWAT system of Scandinavian countries, mainly manual training, to name a few. And there always remained a confusion as to what constituted the industrial education. Frustrated with conceptualizing industrial education in a singular framework, L.D. Wevan wrote in his article "What is an Industrial Education" in 1925 that the ambiguity of the content of the term industrial education is also found when an effort is made to classify and describe the schools that are actually engaged in the work of relating school training to industry and its needs. The nature of confusion regarding industrial education was of two orders. First, whether concerns to control the bodily movement of poor vagrants, delinquents, paupers, destitute, beggars, and criminals led to the creation of a system of industrial schools, and later extended to the technical education to the wider concerns, or was the industrial education of elementary level developed as a branch of specialized education to meet the growing demands of political economy in the West? W. Watson begins his story of industrial school in Aberdeen. The ideal question has become sometimes asked: who discovered the system of industrial schools? As if it were not universally known that the school of industry for the poor, in some shape or the other, existed in all the civilized country in all ages of the world. Industrial schools had their origins in the age of rapid industrialization, increased growth of population, migration, restructuring of urban spaces, expanding rural-urban nexus, and reframing of family values and kinship, and growth of modern state. With industries came the poor who run these industries. Unlike the old figure of poor, the figure of this new poor was central to the imagination of both the modern state and the civil society. It was the tension to reform and control this new poor that resulted in legal intervention on large scale in various states. Given the population increase by the end of 18th and early 19th century, both in England and Ireland, number of children had increased. Destitute children roamed in the countryside and the city streets, begging for foods, pilfering for livelihood. Problem and the number of destitute children were so great that the older ways of containing such segments of society in poor workhouses and orphanages became less effective. At least by the end of 17th century, the children of poor became an identifiable social problem. The social problem was grounded with material needs of changing political economy. It was the loss of labor of these young children which was regretted most by the contemporaries. Hugh Cunningham rightly quotes John Locke from his famous report of the reform of the poor law presented to the Board of Trade in 1697, that the children of the laboring poor are an ordinary burden to the parish and are usually maintained in idleness, so that their labor also is lost to the public till they are 12 or 14 years old. It was to tape this lost labor that industrial schools were established. The problem of destitute children was not limited to England, Ireland and Scotland, but was widespread in Germany, France, Switzerland. Notions of labor idleness were acquiring new meanings with rise of modern state and industrialization. Work acquired a central utilitarian meaning in emerging new political economy and Protestant religious values. Idleness was seen with contempt, especially the idleness and non-work of the lower classes. As bourgeoisie were reforming themselves, they wanted lower classes also to be reformed. In Germany, indolence constituted a social problem. From the late 1870s, work-shy, a collective term for unemployed vagrants, beggars, tramps and vagabonds who didn't work, was a stone in the shoe. In 1880, some 4 lakh people of German Reich lived in the street and begged. They frequently disturbed the vision of a bourgeois culture and were considered as antithesis to the civility and progress. Growing pauperism, vagrancy, unemployment was turning the poor into criminal, revolutionary, immoral, who would become the gravediggers of the bourgeoisie social world. Poverty and pauperism was becoming a highly debatable issue in Germany from 1830s. It was thought that along with the workhouse and later workers' colonies, industrial schools would engage poor children with the intent of giving skills followed by employment. The potentialities of education to reform the deviant child were not doubted, but a doubt of different order prevailed. The doubt was more of an actual fear which concerned with the nature of education to be given in schools for these children of working classes and criminals. This education had not to be certainly literary one, as it will turn moral world of bourgeoisie class upside down. It had to be an education which would not even allow poor vagrants to think of elevating from this position. Such ideals of education had taken deep roots in the ruling bourgeois ideology as the birth of nation state started in Europe. In an essay written by Professor T. Corcoran in June 1919, the limits of possibility of such ideals were discussed in context of England, Ireland, and France. And he wrote, "A narrow ladder leading out of that area may be tolerated. A broad highway would mean a social revolution." And then he quotes from the 1807 parliamentary speech of the president of the Royal Society, who was a great patron of science, and he said in the parliament, "However spacious the project might be of giving education to the laboring classes of the poor, it would in effect be found to be prejudicial to the morals and happiness. It would teach them to despise their lot in life instead of making them good servant in agriculture and other laborious employment to which their rank in society had destined them. Instead of teaching them subordination, it would render them facetious and refractory, as was manifested in the manufacturing countries. It would enable them to read seditious pamphlets, vicious books, and publications against Christianity. It would render them insolent to their superiors, and in a few years the result that would be the legislation would find it necessary to direct the strong arm of power towards them and to furnish the executive magistrate with much vigorous laws than were now in force." The style in prose and tone of his speech would have left other members of parliament to think twice over the matter. These ideas were so pronounced that fears of poor overturning the social order reverberated throughout the 19th and 20th century among the ruling sections and bourgeois society. London was perhaps one of the earliest cities to pioneer the concept of industrial schools, but it was Scotland which was the nursery stage in the development and crystallization of ideas about poverty, poor and juvenile delinquency and industrial schools. Out of his philanthropic concerns, Sheriff Watson established the first industrial school in October 1841 with 20 children. The school was attended boys who were orphans, fatherless, pauper and vagrants. The school was so successful that an industrial school for girls was also established in 1843. 2 years after the boys' industrial school. The testimony of Sir George Grey, the Home Secretary, to their efficiency may be taken as conclusive, and he said, "It appeared that when a child was found begging, instead of being taken before a magistrate or sent to the prison, B was at once put into apartment connected with the child's refuge, from which he was transferred to an industrial school. This had put a stop to juvenile delinquency and had effected a great reform in Aberdeen, part of Scotland. Boys were instructed in 3 hours, that is reading, writing and arithmetic, with the study of Bible, and trained in the habits of industry by industrial training and moral learning. A similar curriculum we see was adopted in India in the missionary industrial schools. The manageability of industrial schools in transforming the attitude of what was termed as Arabs of the street was so impactful. Perth, Dundee, Glasgow, Edinburgh followed the examples of Aberdeen. Industrial schools existed alongside the ragged school, but existence of ragged school was seen as a shame to some sections for a country which was sitting on the top of civilization scale. So the ragged school were basically for those who were not going to the school, who were the most poorer sections, basically for the truants. And it was a shame for a country who was sitting on the top of the civilization ladder. This, however, did not lead to the decline in the increasing number of ragged schools. Industrial schools were a newer version of the older ragged school who suffered from truancy. But it differed from the ragged school in the sense that children could not leave and come institution as per their free will, and a minimum fee was levied. There were 30 ragged schools in 1846 in England, and by 31st December 1865, it had 30 industrial schools and 19 in Scotland. In England, it was merely a preventive institution. It was to save children who were, in the words of Sheriff Watson, living a vagrant life and on the high road to crime, but yet innocent. Industrial schools or any other correction schools in England were mostly funded by private philanthropy and operated under the board of managers, but all were certified schools under the Industrial School Act of 1857. As already pointed out, German cities were one of the earliest cities who brought out industrial school system. By 1900, industrial school acquired new meaning. They were called as continuation industrial school in Germany. They were aimed at training mass of workers. Gewerbe and Vorschulen were aimed training a class of superior foremen and captains of industry. Then there were private technical schools and textile schools managed privately. So there were different grades of industrial schools and technical schools which were established. Just to keep in mind, this was also the time of industrialization where there was a need of such schools. Germany has also manual training schools which were intended for a class of boys and a very large class. It is in every city that idle away their time before and after school on the street, where they learn more readily the vices of the depraved than the virtues of the good. Similar kind of schools were also established in America, just to kind of give the different kind of varieties of school that existed. That by mid 19th century, fears of unregulated body became a concern among middle and upper class sections of American society. The unregulated and uncontrolled poor, especially urban poor child wandering in the streets, emerged as a major threat to Americans' sensibility and social order. This had to be regulated to curb the perceived threat from those unwanted classes of society. The state reform school for boys at Westboro, Massachusetts, established in 1846, were the earliest public institutions to regulate the lives of poor in a family environment. In United States, problems of delinquency were not untouched, as there were delinquent boys, orphans, black race children. So were there industrial schools and reformatories. Like anywhere, there were state industrial schools and philanthropy guided industrial schools managed by Christian denominations. Hampton Agricultural and Industrial Schools and Tuskegee Institute, both supported by American Missionary Association, were the earliest center of education for freed black men. Now coming back to kind of colony, just to see what kind of ideas were not still taken and what were rejected. So that's this section talks about this. Not far from metropole were various colonies of many European empires. Print, electric telegraph between Europe and Asia, and Atlantic cables in 1863 and 1866 respectively. Steamship, railways, and later telephone revolutionized the concept of communication. It facilitated a fast and easy communication of ideas between colonies and empire. Industrial schools in India were not without their precedent in the West. By the middle of 19th century, colonial India inhabited various missionary bodies, not only from Britain but also from other nations. Prominent among them were German Lutherans, the Christian Missionary Society, the London Missionary Society, the United Free Church of Scotland, and the SPZ and the American Arcot Missions. Also the Basil Missions, Methodist, Wesleyan Missions. These mission societies based in different countries had their missions in Asia, Africa, Australia, and native North America. They established industrial schools and trade schools in various colonies like Canada, Australia, South Africa, India, Uganda, Prague, New Guyana. Missionaries created their own hierarchies to sustain these vast networks. Missionaries were frequently transferred in mission posts in different countries. Some went on furlough and others settled permanently. As missionaries traveled, so did the ideas and practiced with them. As ideas and practice moved across borders, they were appropriated, contested, and transformed in local setting. In India, there were industrial schools, but no industrial school act like in England, which actually regulated these schools. Missionaries in India picked up a Western system of education to suit their own purpose of educating poor converted Christians, while at the same time government passed Reformatory Schools Act in 1876 to take care of juvenile criminal, leaving out poor, the beggars, vagrants still out, and then leaving them in the hands of missionaries who were educated in industrial schools. In the process of circulation, many ideas of industrial education were stopped at the colonial border because India was yet in the waiting room of history. Like the industrial schools for female were yet not regulated in India, while there were certified industrial schools for female. So there was this always, and similarly reformatory schools for kind of state regulated reformatory schools for female were not yet implemented in India, because it was thought that India is not yet ready for these kinds of interventions which are actually totally based on Western values, while in India had a kind of different social values and ethics with regard to their women. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.